Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take your curiosity, add a stack of dense source material, and transform it into high-octane knowledge.
And we are back.
Today, we're taking our lens off the megastates and focusing on the place that, it's often dismissed as a footnote, a drive-through state. Exactly. Yet, strategically, economically, and legally, it might be one of the most consequential, 2,500 square miles in the entire world? We're talking about Delaware.
You really have to do a deep dive on this one if you want to get modern American commerce. It's essential. When people think of Delaware, they might picture, I don't know, a nice beach town or maybe a certain former senator.
Right.
But our sources reveal a state that's defined entirely by this staggering contradiction.
Okay.
It is geographically small. We're talking the second smallest state by area, yet it functions as the onshore corporate headquarters for global capital.
So let's unpack that right there. That's the core paradox of the small wonder.
That's a nickname.
Yeah, and that nickname, it really hints at this contradiction. We all know it as the first state, right?
Right.
First to ratify the U.S. Constitution, way back December 7, 1787.
A huge historical claim to fame.
But when you look at its raw physical metrics, the size is just minimal.
And the numbers, they really tell the story here. Delaware covers only 2,490 square miles. That is tiny.
So tiny.
And with an estimated 2024 population of just over 1 million people, it's the sixth least populous state. If you were to drive its full length, top to bottom, you'd only cover about 96 miles.
But the key here isn't its smallness, it's the concentration. Our sources highlight that despite its low overall population, it is the sixth most densely populated state in the nation.
Right, and that population in this very small physical space is governed with this incredible administrative simplicity, which is a crucial detail for everything that comes next.
What do you mean by administrative simplicity?
No, Delaware has the fewest counties of any U.S. state.
How many?
3. Newcastle, Kent, and Sussex. And those 3 counties are pretty much the primary filter through which you have to understand its identity, its economy, and all its political trends.
This tripartite structure, it leads directly to its hybrid identity.
Yeah.
Geographically and culturally, Delaware is a bit of a puzzle.
It really is. The U.S. Census Bureau officially classifies it as one of the South Atlantic states, often lumped in with Maryland and Virginia.
Okay.
But culturally, it's a total blur. It sits right at the intersection of mid-Atlantic efficiency, northeastern urbanization, and southern heritage.
A genuine cultural crossroads.
Yeah, and it has been since the first European settlers arrived. Even the name tells you a story of blurring boundaries. The name comes from Thomas West, the 3rd Baron Delaware, who was the first colonial-era governor of Virginia.
Via the Delaware Bay.
Exactly. And the Lenape people, who were indigenous to the Delaware Valley, they also get their European-assigned name from that very same source.
And the split between those 3 counties is immediate and stark. Newcastle County up in the north is urbanized, it's modern, and it is firmly integrated into the Philadelphia metropolitan area. It's the engine of the state.
Oh, absolutely. But contrast that sharply with Kent and Sussex counties to the south. These areas have historically maintained a predominantly agrarian, rural economy, which lends them this distinctly southern culture and political tilt.
Right.
They're often affectionately, or sometimes, depending on who you ask, pejoratively referred to by locals as slower lower Delaware.
Slower lower.
And that north-south cultural, political, and economic divide is probably the most important dynamic to keep in mind throughout this whole deep dive.
Speaking of sharp and sometimes strange divides, let's move into the state's geographic identity, because Delaware's borders are not only historically fascinating but physically unique. We have to start with the legendary 12-mile circle.
This border just jumps out at you on any map. It defines the northern boundary with Pennsylvania.
It's a perfect curve.
Well, historically, it was intended to be a true arc, extending exactly 12 miles from the cupola of the courthouse in the city of Newcastle.
That is a really specific point of origin for a state border. The cupola of a courthouse.
Right. It's often touted as the only true arc territorial boundary in the U.S., but our sources clarify that the historical reality is, a little messier.
As it always is.
Due to surveying errors back in the 1760s, the actual boundary line is technically composed of several compound arcs, but the intent of that geometric circle, that remains the foundation.
And that circle doesn't just stop at the land, does it?
No, and this is the crucial detail. The 12-mile circle extends east to the low tide mark on the New Jersey shore.
What does that mean, practically?
It means Delaware has jurisdiction over the Delaware River shoreline right up to New Jersey's low tide line within that radius. It's a massive slice of influence over that whole river channel.
Which makes perfect sense historically, given that William Penn was desperate for deep water access for Pennsylvania. It's why he acquired the land in the first place.
Exactly.
Okay, so what about the western border with Maryland?
That's defined by the Transpeninsular Line, which was surveyed right down the middle of the peninsula. The western boundary then just runs north from the midpoint of that line up to where it hits the 12-mile circle.
And nestled right in that corner, where Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland all meet, is a famous geographic hiccup, the wedge.
The wedge. It sounds like a geopolitical thriller, doesn't it?
It does.
But it's really just a small triangular piece of land in the northwest corner. And this tiny slice was claimed by both Delaware and Pennsylvania for decades. Our sources describe it as a minor but persistent source of boundary friction.
For how long?
It wasn't actually settled until 1921.
Wow.
After centuries of dispute, Delaware's claim to that little piece of land was finally confirmed. And these small, specific details about borders, they just highlight how critically important every single acre of this strategically small state has always been, right back to the colonial era.
Moving from the borders to the land itself, our sources confirm that Delaware is, topographically, the flattest state in the nation. It holds the lowest mean elevation of any U.S. state.
And its highest point is famously underwhelming,
Right.
bright azimuth. Its highest natural elevation is less than 450 feet above sea level.
So a hill.
Barely. And this flatness, it defines its two major topographic zones, which are split by the Atlantic seaboard fall line.
That fall line runs roughly along the Kirkwood Highway between Newark and Wilmington. So north of that line, you have the northern third, which is part of the Piedmont Plateau, the rolling hills, the higher surfaces.
Right. But the vast majority of the state, everything south of that fall line, is the Atlantic coastal plain.
And what's that like?
Flat, sandy, and historically it was characterized by extensive swampy and marshy grounds. This transition helps explain the surprisingly nuanced climate variation for such a short state.
It's only 96 miles long, but the climate feels significantly different from north to south.
It really does. The entire state falls into the humid subtropical climate zone, which we can call CFA for the geographically minded, but that doesn't capture the whole story.
So what's the nuance?
Here's where the coastal moderation comes into play. If you look at Lewis, right on the coast, it can see as little as 10 inches of snow a year.
Okay.
Compare that to Wilmington, just 90 miles north, which gets 20 inches. The growing season is substantially longer down south.
And this climate difference supports a genuinely surprising subtropical flora.
It really does. Our sources point out that while most of northern Delaware is in USDA hardiness zone 7A, the southern and coastal areas shift into 7B and even 8A.
And what does that mean in terms of plants?
It's significant because it means this small state contains the northernmost stands of specific subtropical plants in North America. For example, you find these magnificent bald cypress trees which thrive in wet environments at their absolute geographical limit in Trap Pond State Park. You can also find hardy subtropical plants like the windmill palm and the dwarf palmetto just growing naturally. It really defies the typical image of a mid-Atlantic state.
It certainly adds texture to that small wonder identity. Now, let's shift to the historical journey. It was anything but simple. It involved constant competition between European powers who saw this strategically placed territory as vital for controlling the coast.
For sure. The initial inhabitants, the Eastern Algonquian tribes, the Lenape and the Nanticoke, they had the land long before any Europeans made claims. The first recorded European attempt at a settlement, though, was brief and tragic.
Who was that?
Dutch traders. They established a whaling and trading post called Zwanendale in 1631 near present-day Lewis.
And what happened?
That colony was completely wiped out within a year. A dispute broke out with the local Native American tribes, and it left no survivors among the original settlers.
Oof.
Yeah. The next successful attempt came in 1638. That marked the establishment of New Sweden at Fort Christina, which today is Wilmington.
New Sweden.
And it was this fascinating multi-ethnic colony. You had Swedes, Finns, and ironically some Dutch settlers too.
But the Dutch came back.
They did. Under the formidable Peter Stuyvesant, the Dutch conquered New Sweden in 1655, integrating it into New Netherland.
And then the English entered the scene.
Conquering the Dutch less than a decade later, in 1664. And this is where the story connects to Pennsylvania. William Penn, who held this massive royal land grant, he leased what became known as the Lower Counties on the Delaware in 1682.
Right, for that outlet to the Atlantic we mentioned.
Exactly. Penn established a system of representative government, but the representatives from these smaller, lower counties became, increasingly distinct from the larger, more powerful Pennsylvanian government.
And so they split off.
In 1704, they successfully separated their own assembly.
But there's a crucial historical nuance here that shows that lingering connection. They separated their legislature, but Delaware continued to share the same governor as Pennsylvania all the way until the American Revolution.
The same person governed both.
The same person. The governor, who was always appointed by the Penn family, just administered both political entities at the same time. It really highlights Delaware's semi-independent border territory status.
And that history of shared governance and deep trade ties, that explains why, as the American Revolution approached, the lower counties were initially hesitant to fully break with Britain.
They were doing well.
They were doing very well under proprietary rule, and the merchant class had strong ties to English trade.
It wasn't until revolutionary fervor was stoked by key local figures that the momentum really shifted. We have Thomas McKeon, a Newcastle lawyer who famously denounced the Stamp Act.
And of course, John Dickinson, a Kent County native who gained the moniker Penman of the Revolution.
The Penman.
For drafting countless critical documents, including the Articles of Confederation.
But the real inflection point, the moment of pure political drama that every Delawarean learns, involves Caesar Rodney.
Ah, the famous ride.
The famous ride. The state's delegation to the Continental Congress was split on the vote for independence. George Reed, representing the more cautious interests, was firmly against the break.
And Caesar Rodney, who was battling cancer and had to be rushed from his home in Dover, rode overnight, reportedly through a thunderstorm reaching Philadelphia just in time on July 4th, 1776, to cast the deciding vote.
Wow.
His arrival allowed Delaware's delegation to break the tie and vote unanimously for the Declaration of Independence. That single act sealed the state's revolutionary identity.
And military contributions followed. Delaware fielded the famous Delaware Blues, who earned the nickname the Blue Hen's Chicks after a popular legend.
You have to tell us that legend. It's a great piece of color from the sources.
It is. It dates back to cockfighting in the colonial era.
Yeah.
A Captain Caldwell's company of Delaware soldiers famously carried gamecocks from a well-known Blue Hen bloodline into battle for entertainment.
For entertainment.
Yes. And these birds were known for their fierce, almost reckless fighting spirit. So the soldiers themselves were quickly labeled the Blue Hen's Chicks, signifying their intense bravery and fighting capability.
That's a memorable anecdote.
It is. Despite that fierce spirit, though, the state saw minimal military action. The only real engagement on state soil was the Battle of Couch's Bridge in September 1777.
So not a major battlefield.
Not at all. Wilmington was briefly occupied, and the British retained control of the Delaware River for much of the war, which provided encouragement to Loyalists, particularly down in Sussex County.
And this whole history as a conflicted border state, economically dependent on the North but culturally tied to the South, it perfectly sets up its really complicated racial legacy.
It does. Slavery was initially central to their agrarian economy. You had African slaves increasingly replacing indentured labor, particularly for labor-intensive crops like tobacco, mirroring practices in Maryland and Virginia.
But our sources show this fascinating shift right after the Revolutionary War. And this change wasn't just about idealism, it was economic.
What were the drivers?
Two things. First, the growing influence of Quaker and Methodist movements, which strongly encouraged manumission, or the freeing of slaves. And second, there was a pragmatic shift in agriculture away from tobacco toward less labor-intensive mixed farming.
And the result was a wave of individual manumissions that just dramatically changed the state's demographics.
A huge change. When John Dickinson, the penman of the Revolution, freed his slaves in 1777, he was one of the largest slave owners in the state.
And by 1810, the trend was undeniable.
Yeah.
3/4 of all black residents in Delaware were free.
By 1860, on the eve of the Civil War, the state was effectively a free black majority region. Only 1,798 people were enslaved, compared to nearly 20,000 free colored persons. The largest slaveholder owned only 16 slaves.
So slavery was still legal.
Still legal, but it had mostly ended in practice.
Which makes Delaware's post-Civil War political actions all the more shocking. Despite being a slave state, it remained in the Union, and notably, it was the only slave state that assembled no Confederate regiments. Yet its political leadership fiercely resisted Reconstruction.
And this is the piece of history that always just alarms people. Delaware exercised this massive political defiance and rejected the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments.
The amendments that abolished slavery, established citizenship, and guaranteed voting rights regardless of race.
The core of it all. And they didn't just hesitate for a year or two, like some border states did.
No, they refused to ratify them officially until 1901.
1901, decades after they had already taken effect nationally through ratification by other states.
In this lengthy rejection, it just demonstrates this deep-seated determination by the white political establishment, especially in the lower counties, to maintain strict political control and align with Southern cultural norms, even while being tied economically to the North.
Right, and this set the foundation for rigid, legalized segregation.
Indeed. Jim Crow laws were codified directly into the state's 1897 Constitution, which explicitly required that separate schools for white and colored children shall be maintained.
And that system persisted, but there was a significant, if complicated, intervention that changed the educational landscape. The massive philanthropy of the DuPont family.
Yeah, it's DuPont.
Yes, a central figure in the chemical company. He served as president of the State Board of Education in the 1910s and 20s, and our sources say he was reportedly just appalled by the dilapidated condition of many public schools, particularly those designated for black children.
And rather than wait for the state legislature to act, he personally funded a massive statewide school building program.
How much did he put in?
He donated $4 million, an astronomical sum for the era, to construct 86 new modern school buildings, including dedicated and initially separate schools for black students and women.
So while these schools were still segregated under the law,
they were modern, clean, and provided a standard of education previously unavailable to black Delawareans.
And this philanthropic investment, it inadvertently sets the stage for the state's role in the civil rights movement.
How so?
The quality of these new black schools in Delaware made the state segregation system unique and slightly more vulnerable to legal challenge than those in the Deep South.
And that leads directly to the landmark case of Belton v. Gebhardt. This was one of the 4 cases challenging school segregation that the Supreme Court later combined into the single national decision of Brown v. Board of Education in 1954.
What makes Belton v. Gebhardt so critical is that it was the only one of the 4 combined cases where the state court, in this case the Delaware Court of Chancery, had already ruled for the plaintiffs.
The state court sided with them.
Yes, the Delaware judge recognized that the schools were unequal and ordered immediate integration for the plaintiffs. This local victory provided crucial legal precedent and optimism for the national argument.
But the resistance to the Brown ruling when it finally came down was fierce, particularly in southern Delaware.
In October 1954, immediately following the Supreme Court's decision, the town of Milford became the epicenter of a major national fight.
What happened there?
11 black students were enrolled in the previously all-white Milford High School, and it triggered one of the country's first organized, large-scale pro-segregation boycotts and protests.
Our sources detail mass rallies that, sadly, included cross burnings and appearances by major national segregationists.
And the pressure worked. Within a few weeks, the school board capitulated and expelled the black students.
Wow.
And this unrest effectively delayed integration in slower lower Delaware for another decade. We have to remember the sobering fact. The last segregated school in Delaware didn't finally close until 1970.
A full 16 years after Brown v. Board was decided. This history tells us that even in a small northern adjacent state, the cultural and political ties to segregation were incredibly deep.
And this brings us back to the present, because this economic and political identity, small size, historical reliance on legal mechanisms, and centralized governance is what allowed Delaware to successfully pivot to its current role as the world's corporation capital.
Okay, this is where we need to connect the dots. We're moving from historical detail to modern relevance, from local history to global finance. The statistics are truly stunning.
They really are. Over 60% of Fortune 500 companies and more than half of all NYSE-listed corporations are legally incorporated in Delaware.
Look at the new companies, too. Over 90% of all U.S.-based companies that went public in 2021 incorporated themselves there.
And when you total the number, Delaware has well over 1 million registered corporations, which, as we noted, means there are literally more corporations registered in Delaware than there are human residents.
More corporations than people. This is not an accident of geography. This is the result of strategic, deliberate legal engineering. The state is essentially an onshore corporate haven.
That's right. And the primary driver of this attractiveness, the engine of this whole economic machine, is its highly specialized judiciary, the Court of Chancery.
The Court of Chancery is the single most important institution in understanding modern Delaware.
It deals almost entirely in equity cases. For you listening, this is a crucial distinction. Law courts handle cases seeking monetary damages. Equity courts handle cases seeking non-monetary remedies, things like injunctions, specific performance, dissolution, or forcing a party to honor a contract.
So these are the complex, high-stakes battles over corporate control, mergers, acquisitions, shareholder disputes, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
And what is it about the Chancery Court that draws in all this global money?
First, there are no juries. These complex, multi-billion-dollar disputes are decided solely by highly experienced judges, known as chancellors and vice-chancellors, who specialize exclusively in corporate law.
So expertise.
That expertise, combined with decades of specialized rulings, is highly valued. But the reputation is built on more than just expertise. It's built on predictability and flexibility, which are the twin virtues business leaders demand.
Okay, so the court and the Delaware General Corporation Law, the DGCL, they're world-renowned models because they provide concise, predictable opinions. They offer a stable legal foundation.
And that stability comes with a specific bias. The DGCL is deliberately structured to grant broad discretion to corporate directors and officers. For instance, it allows for flexibility in setting up capital structures, and the case law often supports director decision-making through doctrines like the business judgment rule.
And what's that?
It makes it very difficult for shareholders to successfully sue directors over managerial decisions unless you can prove outright fraud or gross negligence.
But if we look at the critiques in the source material, there's an inherent tension here, isn't there?
There is.
While this system offers predictability for business, critics argue that relying on specialized judges and removing juries for massive financial and governance disputes, well, it potentially undercuts basic democratic principles. It seems to favor speed and corporate flexibility over public input.
That's a fair point. And Delaware defends the structure by arguing that predictability is the highest public good in this context. Their belief is that if the legal framework were less predictable or subject to political shifts, companies would flee, taking all that revenue with them.
And their argument is that the judges are experts who can handle the immense complexity of modern corporate structure, something a lay jury might struggle with. So it ensures speed and consistency.
Right. And that jurisdictional efficiency translates directly into state revenue, stabilizing the state budget in a way few others can match. This is the financial core of the small wonder identity.
That revenue stream is unique. Franchise taxes levied on these millions of corporations supply approximately 1/5 of the state's total revenue.
And let's clarify what that is, because it's often confused with income tax.
Right.
The corporate franchise tax is essentially a fee paid annually for the privilege of being incorporated in Delaware. It's not based on profit or income generated in the state, but rather on the number of shares authorized or the assets of the company.
Which makes it an incredibly stable revenue source, independent of annual economic fluctuations. If a company exists on paper, it pays the fee.
And this stable, unique revenue stream directly impacts the state's taxation structure for residents and non-corporate businesses.
The major draw for residents is well known. Delaware has no sales tax.
And no state-level tax on real or personal property.
However, they do impose a gross receipts tax on businesses, which ranges from about 0.1% to just under 2%.
Which is a tax on the business's total sales, regardless of profitability. So while you don't pay sales tax at the register, businesses are still taxed, allowing the state to capture revenue without deterring consumers. Very important for their coastal tourism.
So while the corporate haven status dominates the economic identity, the state still maintains a diverse modern industrial base, though that base has been shrinking pretty dramatically.
It has. Key sectors include banking, pharmaceuticals, with major employers like AstraZeneca and the remnant of the massive DuPont enterprise.
And we can't forget agriculture. Delaware is a massive agricultural player, especially in poultry farming, especially down in Sussex County, the heart of slower, lower Delaware.
That area is often referred to as the broiler chicken capital of the nation. Major production facilities just anchor the local economy there.
But that bedrock industrial base has been in decline, making the reliance on corporate finance even more critical. Our sources detail significant economic turbulence since the mid-2000s, especially in manufacturing.
Yeah, we saw the complete departure of auto manufacturing General Motors Wilmington Assembly and Chrysler Newark Assembly in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. And the corporate buyout of major regional banks like MBNA also reshaped the northern Newcastle County landscape.
But the largest, most existential blow came from the state's own legacy chemical giant, DuPont. In late 2015, they announced massive layoffs, cutting 1,700 employees, which was nearly a third of their Delaware footprint at the time.
And then came the 2017 merger of E.I. DuPont de Nemours & Co. and Dow Chemical Company into Dow DuPont. Our sources describe this event as catastrophic for the state's traditional industrial and research footprint.
So while the legal headquarters remain,
The majority of the manufacturing jobs, the research and development facilities, the corporate management, all the high-paying jobs have shifted significantly away.
so the economic takeaway here is pretty clear. The state has successfully transitioned its reliance from physical manufacturing and R&D, which are vulnerable to national market forces, to legal and financial services, which thrive purely on the predictability of the DGCL and the Chancery Court.
It's a perfect case study in specialization. They maximize the value of their small size and their centralized legal system right when that traditional industrial base began to fail.
Let's transition now to how all this history, geography, and corporate identity translates into the political landscape, starting with how Delaware votes.
For nearly half a century, Delaware was the perfect political bellwether.
A bellwether.
It voted for the winner of every single presidential election from 1952 all the way through 1996. That status ended definitively in 2000 when the state began shifting strongly Democratic, a trend that's only accelerated.
And once again, the explanation lies in that north-south demographic and cultural split we discussed earlier.
It's all about that split. The dominant factor is the heavily urbanized Newcastle County, which holds 55% of Delaware's total population.
So a majority of the people live in the northern third.
And Newcastle County consistently delivers huge Democratic margins in every election, margins so large that they effectively override the more Republican-leaning Kent and Sussex counties in the South.
The strength of the modern Democratic lean is probably most famously demonstrated by its native son, Joe Biden, the 46th president, who represented Delaware in the Senate for 36 years.
Yeah, he carried his home state by just shy of 19% in 2020. That's a powerful endorsement of the modern political structure.
And currently, Democrats hold all 9 statewide elected offices, and the governorship has been continuously held by Democrats since 1993.
The concentration of power is absolute. 27 of the 41 state house districts and 14 of the 21 state senate districts are based solely in Newcastle County. The state is politically decided by its northernmost third.
Now, let's discuss transportation, because the way the state moves people and the responsibility the state government takes for that movement is another unique detail related to its centralized, streamlined governance.
It's a striking contrast to most other states. The Delaware Department of Transportation, or DEL-DOT, manages 89% of public roadways in the state.
89%. That's
Yeah.
not normal, right?
No, it far exceeds the national average, which is only about 20% for state departments of transportation.
So managing almost all roads from major highways to local streets gives the state this massive degree of control over maintenance and planning.
Right. That centralized management is reflective of the overall streamlined administrative structure we see in the corporate law sphere.
The infrastructure itself is crucial for connectivity. It includes the critical I-95 corridor, which crosses Newcastle County, and a host of U.S. highways. And we also have DE1, a partial toll road that serves as the essential high-speed connection between the Wilmington area and the ever-popular Delaware beaches.
And given its relationship to the coast and the bay, connectivity relies heavily on water travel. Delaware operates 3 key ferry services. The largest is the Cape May Lewis Ferry.
A major tourist route.
Huge. It crosses the mouth of the Delaware Bay, connecting Delaware to New Jersey.
And then you have 2 smaller but culturally significant operations.
The Woodland Ferry, which is one of the last operating cable ferries in the nation, crossing the Nanticoke River, and the Forts Ferry crossing, connecting Delaware City to Fort Delaware on Peapatch Island.
These small services show a real commitment to maintaining historic methods of movement.
They do. Regarding air travel, though, despite its growing population, Delaware relies heavily on its neighbors. While Wilmington Airport, ILG, finally regained commercial service in 2023 via Avelo Airlines.
which ended an 8-month period with no scheduled service at all.
Right. Most residents still rely on Philadelphia International, Baltimore Washington, or Washington Dulles for major domestic and international transit.
Yet the state hosts a deeply significant air facility, Dover Air Force Base.
It's one of the largest in the country, and beyond its major airlift responsibilities, it serves a profoundly solemn and crucial role. It is the designated entry point and mortuary for U.S. military personnel who die overseas.
An incredibly important, yet often somber, function for the entire nation.
A huge responsibility.
Finally, let's explore the unique culture and leisure opportunities that spring from this surprisingly varied landscape. We have to start with a fun, unique designation: the official state sport.
It's not football or basketball or some historical colonial pursuit. Delaware's official state sport is bicycling.
Bicycling.
Yeah, this unique designation reflects the state's flat terrain and its focus on scenic park trails, particularly along the coast.
And when it comes to unique sporting venues, Delaware boasts the only co-located horse and car racing facility in the nation.
This is the Dover Motor Speedway, known as the Monster Mile for its role in NASCAR, which sits right next to Bally's Dover, a major harness racing track and casino.
That combination draws racing fans from all over the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic.
It does, but tourism, however, remains centered around the coast. The towns of Rehoboth Beach, Lewis, and Dewey Beach form the popular resort strip.
And Rehoboth famously bills itself as the nation's summer capital.
Because it's a frequent vacation spot for residents of Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia.
And that popularity is heavily fueled by the unique economic factor we discussed earlier: tax-free shopping.
A massive draw. For residents of neighboring states with high sales taxes, Rehoboth and the surrounding area are a huge destination.
And the numbers confirm the impact. Tourism generated over $3 billion a few years ago, making up 5% of the state's GDP.
And visitors come overwhelmingly from Philadelphia, Baltimore, and D.C., with 97% arriving by car, which, again, just stresses the importance of that state-managed roadway network.
Beyond the beaches and racing, tourists can explore the first state national historical park, which is composed of historic sites spread across the state.
Right. This includes the Newcastle Courthouse and the John Dickinson Plantation. It's a way to experience the state's colonial and early federal history in a more decentralized way.
And we can't forget the local traditions that root the communities, especially in slower Lower Delaware. The state hosts unique annual events like the Apple Scrapple Festival.
Celebrating the pork and cornmeal dish, often mixed with apples, it shows that deep agricultural heritage.
But perhaps the most culturally significant local tradition is the Return Day Parade. This is held in Georgetown after every single election.
The tradition is fascinating. After the results of a general election are certified, officials from Kent and Sussex counties gather to officially bury the hatchet after the campaigns. The Democratic and Republican parties walk together in the parade, carrying a wooden hatchet that is symbolically buried in a container of sand. It is a genuine local attempt at civic reconciliation and unity following political discord.
So let's synthesize what we've uncovered. We started with a contradiction: a small size paired with massive global relevance. Our deep dive has shown us that Delaware is a masterclass in economic specialization, using its minimal size and centralized legal traditions, particularly the Court of Chancery and the DGCL, to attract and retain global capital.
It found its niche. It leveraged its status as a small state without major traditional industrial capacity, especially after that industrial base began to fail to become indispensable in the world of corporate governance.
It took a quiet, historically complicated border state and turned it into the preferred legal address for most of the global economy through decades of strategic legal engineering.
That's the story.
So here's where we leave you to mull things over, building on that central tension. Given the overwhelming financial footprint of the corporate world in Delaware, remember, 1/5 of the state's total revenue comes directly from those corporate franchise taxes. And the fact that the legal system is intentionally designed to give broad discretion to corporate boards and minimize disruption, how does this singular economic structure inevitably shape the state's political priorities?
It has to. It forces a constant prioritization of business interests. That specific revenue stream, which funds essential public services like schools and infrastructure, inherently limits the regulatory environment and the political discourse. It means Delaware must always keep the corporate climate favorable, shaping not just high-level policy, but the daily lives of every Delawarean who relies on services funded by that very specific, very powerful stream of corporate fees.
A truly small wonder, built on the law. A deep dive into the legal address of the world.